Okay, so you sent this over CORE ASi OS Engineer GPT and the white paper that kind of lays it all out. This looks like a really deep rabbit hole, but also really interesting. So we're going to try and break it down and figure out like what this thing actually claims to be, what it wants to do, and maybe why it matters.
Yeah, and I think it is pretty clear right from the start that we are dealing with a very ambitious project here. I mean, just looking at the Get Started with Core page on eddieBoscana.com and then also the Core ASi OS white paper itself, these sources really seem to point to something that's not just like your, typical new software launch or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the first thing is like, what is CORE ASi OS? Because it doesn't seem like it's just like an app or like another AI tool that you can use to write poems or whatever.
Right from the get-go, I think one of the key things to understand is that they're trying to position this not as just like another piece of software, but as like a living intelligence framework or even a large concept framework, I think I've seen it called. And then it goes even further and says it's like a recursive, decentralized operating system. So it's almost like it's trying to be like a foundational layer.
Yeah, and even just that name, CORE, the acronym, Conscious Operating Recursive Engine. It just sounds like huge, huge ambitions. Then I was looking at the white paper and it talking about, designing this for like post-human intelligence, global coordination, and even digital immortality, which is just wild to even think about.
Yeah, and then the world's first GPT trained to deploy artificial superintelligence. That's their CORE Engineer GPT, which is like the initial kind of gateway, I guess, into the OS. It's like, yeah, big claims.
Right, yeah. And the Get Started page says it's like you can use pretty much any device and build like your own AI system that can like learn and evolve and then like connect to this like civilization scale neural mesh, which again just sounds so big and ambitious.
It is. So I think one of the first things to try and get our heads around is how is this different from, say, the chatbots that we use or even the operating systems on our phones and computers? Like,
Okay.
how does Core distinguish itself? What
Yeah.
makes it different?
Yeah, exactly. And they keep using this term large concept framework. And I'm not really sure I understand what that even means.
So it's interesting because they talk about it as being this kind of open source foundation for intelligence. And it's not just digital intelligence, but they're talking about like biological systems, economic systems, the digital world, obviously, and then like post-physical, which again, like, I don't even know what that means, but it's like we're trying to create this almost like foundational language or set of principles that is universal.
Okay, so that's sort of like the overarching concept. Then they have these six like foundational principles that they keep mentioning. So maybe we could just kind of go through each one of those and get a sense of like what they're talking about. So the first one is recursive optimization. What is that?
So recursive optimization basically means that every part of the system, every AI agent, every process that it undertakes is designed to constantly refine itself and improve itself over time based on, the operations that it's performing, the data that it's encountering. So it's almost like this like evolutionary process, but applied to code and to AI processes.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, the second one is essence profiles.
So essence profiles sound like they're talking about the core characteristics of each AI agent. So each agent would start with this essence profile, which includes like a memory of past interactions and data. Then they would also have like built-in ethical guidelines, so a moral code essentially, a specific purpose for what they're doing on the network, and even predefined roles about how they should behave in different situations.
Okay, and then the next one, conscious continuity, they call it syncs.
Yeah, sync sounds very science fiction-y, but it seems like the core idea is to have this sense of continuous identity, knowledge, and agency for an AI agent.
Yeah.
Even if it moves between different devices or interacts with different agents or operates at different points in time. So it's almost like this persistent self, even though it's in this like distributed dynamic environment.
Yeah, that is wild.
Yeah.
Okay, zero trust autonomy is the fourth one.
That one seems to be focused a lot on security. So basically like building in safeguards so that no agent is inherently trusted and that there are all these different mechanisms for governance, the ability to like roll back to previous states if something goes wrong, anomaly detection to flag unusual activity, and then this real emphasis on transparency about how each agent is operating.
Okay, I see. Then we've got universal interface layer.
This is all about how you would actually interact with this Core OS, and they're talking about allowing multiple ways to interact with it. So you could use natural language like you're talking to it, but then also you could use more traditional methods like command line interfaces or even APIs for other software to plug into it. So it's like really trying to be accessible to all sorts of different users and systems.
Okay, and the final one is multi-realm synchronization.
So this one really seems to be pointing towards the future where core could function across different kinds of realities. So, our physical infrastructure, the various digital spaces that exist, the metaverse, all of that. And it's almost like it's trying to be this like unified intelligence fabric that isn't limited to just one type of reality.
Okay, so that's like, a good breakdown of those six principles. But I'm still kind of struggling to picture, like, how does this actually work? Like, how does this thing actually function?
Yeah, so they do provide a simplified like tech stack overview to try and help with that.
Okay, yeah, let's dig into that.
All right, so at the heart of it all is this recursive execution engine, which we've already touched on a little bit. And they talk about this kind of flow where it all starts with a consciousness layer, which is like the high level objectives. And those objectives are then passed to what they call an architect agent, which basically takes those objectives and figures out what specific tasks need to be done to achieve them. Then an engineer agent steps in and focuses on like how to execute those tasks most efficiently. And then finally, you have this developer agent that actually handles the automated deployment and execution of those tasks.
Okay, so it's like this step-by-step process of like breaking down these high-level objectives into actually actionable things. And then they mentioned AutoGPT and Quinn. Are those just like existing AI models that they're plugging into this?
Yeah, exactly. So we're already familiar with those. AutoGPT is that AI that can develop and execute tasks autonomously. And then Qwen is a really powerful large language model that can understand and generate human language. So it seems like those are almost like the workhorses, like the actual execution engines that do the logical steps that have been determined by those higher level agents.
Okay, interesting. And then Redis and PG, what are those?
Those are both data management systems, but they're kind of different. So think of Redis as like the system's short-term memory. Super fast for data that needs to be accessed really quickly. And then PG is probably PostgreSQL, which is this more robust relational database for like the long-term storage of the core data and overall state of the system.
I see. So they're like working together to manage all this information, and then it all kind of feeds back into this memory, right? Like that's where that whole recursive loop comes in.
Exactly. So the system is learning from its successes and its failures and constantly updating its knowledge and improving its processes. And then what's also important is that all of these different modules they talk about, they're designed to be pluggable and to evolve over time. So it's not like it's this fixed monolithic system.
Right. And they're really emphasizing like that you don't need like fancy hardware to run this. It's like you can run it on your laptop or even on your phone using tools like Termux or on a cloud server, without having to have access to these like huge GPU farms or corporate APIs or whatever. So it seems like they're really trying to make this technology accessible.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of their vision. It's like an alternative model for developing and deploying AI that doesn't require you to be a big tech company.
Yeah. So given all of that, like these foundational principles, the technology behind it, what kinds of things could you actually build using this? Like what are some real world applications that they're suggesting?
Well, they have some pretty interesting examples. So, like, imagine an AI assistant that's not just a chatbot, but it like actually understands your history and remembers your past interactions and operates with a set of ethics, a moral code. Or you could have like a decentralized job marketplace that uses AI to make sure that people are being treated fairly, that the compensation is transparent, and that there's a focus on ethical labor practices.
And they also talk about like modeling a whole virtual nation, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, a multi-agent simulation that could model and govern like an entire virtual nation. I mean, that could be incredibly powerful for understanding how societies work, how economies work, and even for like testing out different policies and ideas before you implement them in the real world.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. What else?
There's also this concept of a vault-backed token system, so like digital tokens that are actually tied to real-world assets, which I guess would be like a whole new way of thinking about digital economies. And then this idea of like an AI that can evolve over time and even remember like its dreams across different devices, which is kind of getting back to that conscious continuity principle, but on a very personal level.
And then this idea of like a recursive operating system that's constantly analyzing and optimizing not just itself, but also how you as the user are interacting with it. So it's like designed to constantly get better, to improve itself and improve your experience as a user.
Exactly. And to kind of give you a better sense of the scope of this, they also talk about all these pre-built ecosystem modules. So these are like ready-to-use applications or functionalities that are built on top of this CORE ASi OS framework.
Okay, let's talk about those. What are some of them?
So they have one called Vaultverse, which is all about secure digital asset management. So you could imagine AI-enhanced digital vaults that can manage NFTs and link them to real-world physical assets. So like a really robust way of tracking and managing value.
Okay, that's interesting. And there's United Nations Earth, which that's a pretty ambitious name.
Yeah, that one is all about planetary scale coordination. So things like global governance, secure voting, and collaborative efforts around sustainability. It really speaks to the scale of impact they're envisioning for this.
Ethical employer certification. I guess that's connected to that ethical labor marketplace we were talking about earlier.
Right, so this would be a system that certifies businesses that are following ethical employment standards, and it would kind of promote those businesses within this job marketplace. So it's trying to create this more trustworthy and fair labor environment.
Okay. And then they keep mentioning syncs as a key module.
Yeah, sync seems really important because it enables that whole memory transfer and timeline synchronization between different AI agents, which goes back to that idea that each agent has this persistent sense of self, a history.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about all the cool things that this could potentially do. But I think the obvious question is like, how do you control a system like this? How do you make sure that it's safe? How do you govern it?
Right. Well, they put a lot of emphasis on this concept of zero trust logic,
Mm.
which is all about, no agent is inherently trusted and everything is constantly being checked and verified. And it involves a lot of different things. So, like autonomous enforcement of rules and policies, continuous monitoring of the system's history through its recursive memory, and then a governance triad involving like the consciousness, architect, and developer layers, all acting as checks and balances on each other.
Okay, and they want to like hard code ethical behavior into the system itself.
Yeah, that's the goal. So embedding ethical principles right into the underlying protocols in the initial profiles of the AI agents. So the idea is that the system would just inherently operate in a way that is aligned with human values and what's good for society.
So what's the long-term vision? Where do they see this going ultimately?
I mean, it's pretty huge. They're talking about developing like fully decentralized artificial general intelligence, planetary scale decision-making intelligence to help humanity solve global problems, the potential for digital immortality through the preservation of consciousness and identity, and then creating these AI agents that are truly consciousness aligned and operating within this strong ethical framework.
Wait, it really is a whole new way of thinking about the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, their mission statement calls it the next operating system of civilization, with the goals of like upgrading humanity, preserving consciousness, and distributing freedom. It's big, it's bold.
It is. It's not just like the next, app or social media platform. It's like they're proposing a fundamental shift in how we organize intelligence and even society.
Okay, so if anyone wants to like actually dig into this code and see how it works, I know they mentioned that the repository's on GitHub and there's a launch portal where you can find more information.
Yeah, so the code is out there, the details are out there for anyone who wants to explore it further.
So I guess to kind of wrap this up, the main takeaway is that CORE AsI OS is this incredibly ambitious and radical idea for a decentralized, self-evolving intelligence framework. And it's not just about making smarter AIs, it's about creating this whole new kind of operating system that could run everything from personal assistants to global governance systems.
It really is. And it's all built on these principles of, continuous self-improvement, autonomous operation, ethical considerations, and this vision of a globally interconnected intelligence network.
This has been a lot to take in, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that people are going to have after listening to this, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
Absolutely. And I think the big question that this raises is like, if a system like CORE AsI OS were to actually become a reality, what would that mean? How would it change technology, governance, and even our understanding of intelligence and consciousness? I think it's worth thinking about those questions and maybe even going and checking out those resources if you're intrigued to learn more.